Book 3 Section 44 2 Conversations for 1. Julia, was I doing the right thing? That was a question I had been continually asking myself since the apparition of Graham in what used to be my restaurant. At no point had I managed to convince myself with a satisfactory answer, other than the one that it must be what Zeus and his mates want. Had Graham appeared without a forewarning of the celestial messenger, then I would not have stopped at a couple of coffee cups. Maybe I wouldn't even have recognized him, who knows? Certainly not me. Since he left, I have had to tie up all the details here. My husband soon agreed to the latter-day de rigueur prefix, though it appeared like he were losing a faithful servant to the company rather than a wife. I am provided for. My share of the various lucrative establishments I ran for him exceeds $500,000. Graham has the same, and so we should begin things on a reasonable footing. Quite frankly, if we get as far as having to worry about investments and the like, then I would take that gladly. My principal fear at the moment is the possibility of being gunned down at the airport or before. Whilst I had to continue about my business, the prospect of what could become of me, and what might happen to me, hell, maybe even us, has been ever present in my mind. It would seem not to be the case for the person I am planning to share the rest of my life with. Whilst I'm a bag of chain-smoking nerves, Graham continues about his business in Malaga, with the pretext of maintaining social veneer, as he calls it, without exhibiting the merest concern that the current undertaking could be anything more than the continuance of his amusing forays into life. Surely, he can pick up on how nervous I am, but I don't understand why he doesn't try to make some kind of comment. Even with the boundaries of our strictly adopted code, some kind of effort would be possible. I would be so disappointed, even devastated, if I found out his true motivation was that there was nothing better to do. I lie awake at night and examine every angle, while he sleeps off the wine and whiskey. Then I think that if he loved what he was doing in Malaga, then he wouldn't have done what he has done so far. But sometimes men are such sheep that you want to believe in them, but they so often fail to deserve it. He feels that he is handling the situation in a utilitarian and pragmatic way, whereas I get the impression that he has stumbled upon this chance and may still disappear into the night without me. Of course, that is a pernicious thing to say or even suggest, but if I only had some form of proof that it wasn't so, then I would uncouple such thoughts from my head. If I'm not thinking about Graham, then I am subconsciously rewriting scripts and endings to film, TV programs, and even stories found in throwaway magazines to fit in with the current crisis. My mind also keeps wandering through the storybooks of friends and acquaintances, people whose love stories I just had to analyze in the quest for my own self-help. Most people seem to have been happy enough, though have not had an agnate struggle to that of Odysseus and Penelope. The only story I can recall that was not the product of fiction was the story of my friend Gloria. For the past few days Gloria's story has pervaded my brain on so many occasions I half expect her to appear out of the blue, just as Graham did. When I refer to Gloria as my friend, I am being less than honest. It was a curious relationship in so much as we really couldn't stand each other, yet we're often together. I've never known a person with whom I have had, I am quite pleased to say, so little in common with, yet despite that she appeared to despise everything I stood for as much as I did with her. We met when I was living in London. Before my Spanish jaunt was even a thought, I was painting and selling the occasional doodle and she just appeared. She was one of those people that you can't remember meeting, yet at the same time it is hard to recall when I didn't know her. Despite the fact that we may have loathed each other on the surface, we both liked each other's set of mutual friends. That made up for a lot. Most of the time we were never together, alone, anyway, so it was just a case of ignoring her. That may sound callous, but she was a deplorable witch. Gloria considered herself to be a good stock. Estranged family relations meant that she could perpetuate this myth without a worrying over-reliance on the truth. Most of the people she boasted in front of were similar social climbers whose only desire was to have their voice heard above the mass cacophony of piffle. Gloria may have come from money, but it was her marriage that propelled her to the elite of the wealthy. Her husband was a certain Richard Pennington. Not a remarkable name, but quite a remarkable man. If you judge things by business acumen, as a human being his yield was poor. He and Gloria were remarkably suited, shallow and greedy. Their main motivation on this planet was the accumulation of residual wealth purely for show purposes. Richard had been a regular on the top 100 richest men in Britain list for the best part of a decade. Gloria could have been a model, had she cared for any work. However, Gloria was quite happy to play the part of the busy society wife, gliding between appointments and generally wondering how she managed to get so much done in her hectic days. Richard had reached his personal peak of the rich list at number 7 3 years previous. He had remained there for another 3, and saw the possibility of moving up, ideally reaching the coveted top spot, as complicated at an optimistic estimate. This was a matter of great concern to Richard, and one that had been commented more than once in the social circles in which they moved. Not that there was any disgrace in being the 7th richest man in the country, though those who knew Richard's ambition knew that his rage at failing to make at least the Champions League places was eating him up. Gloria heard this rumour and became even more obsessed with the failure of continued upward mobility that it was decided they needed to hatch a plan. The only person that Richard knew of in a parallel industry who possessed greater wealth was the American magnate, Lanyard Winthrop III. Lanyard Winthrop III was the owner of the hugely more successful Colin Barton Trudell Investment Bank, and America's 4th wealthiest man. Being 3 places higher on the American list meant Richard's placing on the UK list would mean his only concern would be a certain Swedish furniture manufacturer. It would not be a simple task to acquire Lanyard Winthrop III's wealth. He had spent the vast majority of his life acquiring it, and he had been very careful with wives and the like who may tempt him to fritter some away. They had only met on a pair of occasions, but Richard got the feeling that his American friend was somewhat keen on Richard's darling wife. The evil pair opened a frighteningly good bottle of wine and began to hatch. It was decided that Gloria should go over to the States, look up Lanyard Winthrop III and let him know just all the dastardly deeds that her rotten rogue of a husband had done to her. Once he heard this catalogue of lies he would, it was hoped, offer her a shoulder to cry on. Gloria knew that she would have to offer something more than her own shoulder in return, but that was considered perfectly acceptable in terms of the potential investment. Taking an inspirational John Grisham with her on the plane, she planned to trick Lanyard Winthrop III into parting with his empire and then returning to Richard. The plan was devious, illegal and quite erotic, she thought. She missed Richard in those first few weeks, but she was the sacrifice to win the war. Her role was essential. The 2 sides would never come together without this gift. As expected, Lanyard Winthrop III fell rapidly under the gaze of Gloria. He believed every word she said, and continually made offers to prevent her from such misery in the future. At night, she would phone Richard and laugh about the comedic side of her dalliance. For a while it was all quite fun. She compiled evidence and forged a series of rather disturbing photographs which would be used to help her cement the deal. What she was also banking on was the fact that Lanyard Winthrop III would fall so hopelessly in love with her that the mere thought of not being together would make him care so little for his empire that he could equally live without it. This seemed perfectly plausible until, around week 5, something strange happened. Gloria thought that all this was an act, yet she found herself increasingly drawn to Lanyard Winthrop III's company, and kept finding excuses not to phone Richard. She had enough evidence to help Richard take the empire, but could not do so. She kept asking for more time, until she realized that she had fallen madly in love with Lanyard Winthrop III. Richard phoned to ask for an update, and Lanyard Winthrop III took to the receiver. He told Richard that Gloria had confessed, but that he had forgiven her and she would be staying with him. Richard entered a state of depression that very night. Realizing the futility of his lofty position without Gloria, realizing how empty his house was, his life was, realizing that he had driven her away with his obsessive greed. He felt that if he had the chance to talk to her that she would see reason. So, drunk, he boarded a flight to New York. He wanted her to see reason, but he was not prepared for the sight of them together. He arrived at Lanyard Winthrop III's luxury apartment block and entered. Richard was also known in these parts. He could see them through the window. They were dining and looking enormously happy. He knew in that moment that she would never go back to him. He hung around for a couple of days, spying on them, until Lanyard Winthrop III went on a business trip and Richard sneaked into the house, brandishing a kitchen knife and ending his now ex-wife's life. An hour later he was on a plane back to London, where he would await retribution. The company began to suffer. He was never there, and his mind spent even less time there. He was amazed that the New York police had not come after him, even a month after Gloria's death. He sat in a park in central London, eating a sandwich, thinking to himself that he had got away with it, and almost ready to start again. He would swear now that he heard the sound, but the fraction of time it took for the noise of the trigger being pulled and the bullet entering Richard's body made it impossible. Lanyard Winthrop III stood over the lifeless cadaver, threw the gun onto the grass and made preparations for the rest of his life to be spent in a psychiatric institution. So, with stories like that going through my mind, it's hard to maintain a positive outlook. Maybe I'll just open a bottle and keep my fingers crossed. This is happening for a reason, and it must be good enough, some higher force, so I don't know why I am having such a problem with it. Graham, I know she thinks that I'm just going along with this because there doesn't seem to be anything better on the horizon, but I do believe in what is happening and want more than anything for it to work. How can I show her though? She is cold and short with me whenever we speak. I look forward to those moments more than anything during the day and then feel empty afterwards. I want to tell her everything. I want to appear keen, but every time we get close in a conversation, she breaks off. I know she has to do this. I know she is stronger than me. I accept this, but it hurts. Plus, you never know. If she wants you to appear doting, you do just that, then she tells you to be distant. It's the same when she comes to you holding two dresses and asks you which one looks better on her. There is no right answer. How I am longing for tomorrow. Desiring its arrival, yet fearing the possible outcomes, both positive and negative. If we get as far as having to question the wisdom of the venture, then we will have traveled much further than anyone had anticipated. The last conversation we had was not one of the greatest, and she signed off by telling me that she had been listening to sad songs and searching out stories on the net and in magazines. I just can't get out of my head the potential disaster I am heading towards, and I now also fear the possibility of me and Julia actually not working things out. This fear started when out of boredom I began to play one of Gore's association games. He has theories that people's personalities can be attributed to various aspects of their favored media and sporting beliefs. His last one was that people are either generally negative or positive, and this can be proven by a test of if you were from X city, which team would you support. It seems to hold water too, although there are no guarantees in football. Someone who responds, AC Milan, Real Madrid, Arsenal, Liverpool or Bayern will generally have experienced more joy on the park than those who go for Inter, Atletico, West Ham, Everton and 1860. The argument goes that by eschewing the glamour you create a finer understanding of life through pain, though it also makes you a contrary swine. So I'm left with Boca, Celtic, Wednesday, CSKA Moscow and FC Brussels. Now I know that I'm reading too much into this. Whilst more positive people enjoy their luxuries, I thought it best not to mention this level of pondering to Julia, and I told her that that was just nerves, but have now realized that my own thoughts have been pervaded by the dreadful story that I was once told in a boozer in London. The story is one of true tragedy, one that still causes me to shiver to this day, despite me not coming within 100 kilometers of any of the participants. As the story should have been a nationwide scandal, but never made the press, I assume that the names that I was told were changed, so we may as well have some fun with the monikers. The story begins with Major Rupert, a top-ranking army officer and all-round military-based chappie. He was born a century and a half too late for the world he inhabited, and would have been much more at home dashing round the battlefields of the Crimea rather than left with the politically motivated and thoroughly UN soldier-like warfare of the late 20th century. However, he was an honest and loyal person who based his life on a set of ideals that he would take with him to his grave and would respect the orders given from his superiors without too much question, whilst knowing that he would always follow them. By the time the First Gulf War came along, Major Rupert was looking forward to his first real war. Of course, he had participated in the Falklands, but he saw the chance of pitting his wits alongside the Americans, whom he considered inevitably superior in terms of technology and budget, yet remained unconvinced whether they were really a match for his glorious men. He had been preparing for a true conflict since he first held his father's rifle while he was still in the shortest of trousers. Things went well for Major Rupert in the Gulf. He soon saw that Iraqi military might was more a fictitious creation of the American news networks, though he was impressed at the Americans' light show. With the inevitable victory around the corner, Major Rupert was chosen for a special mission outside Baghdad and into the heart of the land controlled by one of Saddam's top generals. When Major General saw the plans for the attack, his first emotion was concern. He had seen firsthand the folly of armies, ludicrous plans formed by generals, only conceived for their own personal glory, despite the bloodshed and loss to the infantry. He had seen how other commanders had little or no respect for the men who carried out their work. Major Rupert believed his role was to muck in with the lads and create morale in the unit from the top downwards. Of course, It was unavoidable that behind his back, the squaddies would take the piss out of the major, but deep down, and especially when they heard stories from other regiments, they knew they were lucky to have someone who actually saw them as people. Major Rupert voiced his concern over the feasibility of the plan to the Home Secretary, but Major Rupert knew the setup. He was given orders to be carried out, not to be questioned. He felt he had to voice his concern, but he was soon away putting the plan together. If he succeeded, it would be a major coup for the British Army, and possibly lead to the surrender of the current regiment in Iraq. The chances of success, though, were minimal. Major Rupert's force was under strength, well prepared, that was never in question, and accompanied by a worrying desire to be sliced to bits by machine gun fire in the name of their great nation. Indeed, Major Rupert's wish was to die on the field of battle and have his coffin dragged down Pall Mall by military horses, with full honours. As they moved into position, it seemed that he just might get his wish. The headquarters of the Iraqi General Sadat Fallujah lay in the mountainous area in the north near Sulaymaniyah. It was well guarded and remained one of the last strongholds of the fabled Republican Guard. The men knew this was a dangerous mission but went in, their spirit unfaltering and their desire to flush out the enemy stronger than ever. Within 15 minutes all lay dead or captured. Those who were captured were executed within the hour. News filtered back to the British government about the failure of the attack, and it was decided to keep the media at bay. Major Rupert's wife was told by the government that her husband had not only failed in the mission, but had deserted and had been in cahoots with Sadat Fallujah since he first read the Quran in the early days of the war. There would be no state funeral, no investigation. Her husband had been a traitor, and if she, or any of her family, tried to make a fuss, there would be no scandal. The press was with the government. Her family would come to the same grisly end as Major Rupert. Major Rupert's wife, Scarlett, did not believe any of this for a second, and summoned her daughters, Emily and Felicity, to discuss a plan of action. The daughters also believed their father was innocent, and the victim of a government cover-up, but how could they prove this? And, more importantly, who would listen? It broke Scarlett's heart to think that her husband had died in combat without having the nation for which he gave his life honoring the sacrifice that he had made. She implored Emily, who was courting the son of the Foreign Secretary at the time, that she try to make some peace for her father's name, which was now being sullied in hushed tones, but would surely one day be the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. Scarlett awaited her daughter's return anxiously, hoping that she could make them see sense, but her optimism soon dissipated when Emily returned with news that they were to leave, with great haste. The government also stipulated that Emily could see her betrothed no more, and should one more word be heard on the subject of Major Rupert, Felicity and her children would be the next victims. Emily tried to contact her now ex, but it was impossible. She sat in one of the many rooms of the family house and pondered the future, when she heard a single shot from upstairs. She rushed up the stairs, but knew not why she gave haste, as she was more than aware of what was awaiting her when she got to the top. Her mother lay on the floor. Her father's trusty revolver used to allow her to rejoin Major Rupert on the other side. After the incident, Felicity went mad and was taken away to an institution. Her husband maintained custody of the children, but Felicity would never recognize them again. One afternoon, her medicine was forgotten, and she chewed her own tongue off. Left unattended, she bled to death in her quarters. Emily tried to see her ex-lover, now not looking for revenge, but for someone that might want to hold her. He said they could meet at the parents' country house, but Emily never made it. Her car crashed into a tree on the road down there. Those who inspected the car knew that there was no brake fluid, but nobody said anything. I hadn't thought about that story for such a long time, even though I never knew any of the people involved, or even if it were true, I do remember the minister having to resign and never being heard of since. All those lives lost and no one came out winning. Not the ideal preparation for what we are about to do, but we have to crack on. I imagine by 11 o'clock on Monday morning I will know whether my story will end at Malakoo Airport. Whatever happens, for now, either we die together tomorrow, or we escape to Japan. Dear readers, we shall leave you at the airport. For you, also, have earned a break.